We'll break it down with our guy Neil Solondz from Raise Radio. Hello, Neil. How are you, buddy?
Good. How are you, Jay? Thanks for having me on.
I'm so honored. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm so excited for baseball season. Such a unique year ahead. I was actually at a Tampa Catholic baseball game last night, and I was with one of the Rays employees that is going to be working on switching the stadium over after the last spring training game before the first regular season game. And she said, I don't know how much sleep I'm going to get over those couple of days. Neil, this is you, such a baseball lifer. You love the game so much. This is one of the most unique seasons, I think, regardless of the team in baseball history.
It's different. It's obviously unique for a lot of reasons. And, for all of your viewers and listeners, I just hope, everyone who's been affected by both Milton and Helene are recovering okay. As I know, some of our employees are still recovering from the damage that was done. And obviously, as an organization, we still are. It's going to be a unique season, but I'm excited for it. I would think if there's any organization that's well equipped to handle adversity, it's probably this group. So let's go.
Isn't that like it's just kind of the standard race thing, right? Like the other teams, they would get thrown off. There's almost something there's an embrace the chaos type of thing with this Rays organization, isn't there? Or they just like, hey, things may not go our way. I just remember a couple years ago when I think who was the only every starter went down with injury except one. It was just like, all right, well, we'll just run the opener out a bunch of times. If there's a team that embraces the chaos, nobody does it better, probably in all of professional sports than the Rays.
Well, I think it speaks to how things are built at the top, the ability to kind of be calm within difficult situations. And Eric Neander and Kevin Cash are as good as they come in terms of heading up baseball operations and heading up managing a ball club and heading up a coaching staff. And there are really good people around. But, I also think the players are talented and have come in quite motivated. Remember, this is also a group that had been to the playoffs 5 years in a row. And last year was the first time since then they hadn't been. So I think they're motivated for that reason. And there are probably a lot of people who are discounting or knocking the Rays and saying, well, with all they have to deal with, how are they going to be able to overcome this? And I think it can become very galvanizing and motivating. And I'm hoping it is for this group.
Yeah, I'm with you. And I think one of the biggest names, Neil, when you look at this, and of course, we'll get to the pitching in a second, but there's a buzz about Junior Caminero. I mean, he's taking a picture with LeBron James, right? He was just absolutely incredible. We were watching the game, like how much winter ball are we really watching in the Tampa Bay area if there's no Rays players? And this guy's hitting nukes to center field, winning the MVP. I think he's just like the guy that I have circled. What do you think the ceiling is? What kind of year do you think that Junior Caminero could have in 2025?
I don't want to put too much pressure on a 21-year-old kid. I think that's the one thing we have to remember in all this, that he's still extremely young. And while Albert Pujols has already touted him as a potential Hall of Famer, and he hit 450 in winter ball, and he did great things, and he's extremely motivated too.
Right.
What I love about Junior is watching him in the quarter of a season he was with the Rays last year, how hard he worked every day. He and Brady Williams before every game came up with a routine. And then the Rays talked with him about how he wanted to improve his body in the offseason. And he's done the work. His weight may not be different, but it's distributed a lot differently. And he's running a lot better. So he's a physically better athlete. And of all the questions that he was asked when he walked into camp, by the way, the day the pitchers and catchers reported, he was already there. He said what he wants is a ring. And that speaks to what motivates him. So I'm excited. What are fair expectations for him? I don't know. I mean, I can tell you what, if he was an 800 OPS, 25 homers, 80 plus RBIs and solid defense at third, I'd be pleased. He might not be. He probably has a much higher bar than that. But for a 21-year-old, knowing how hard the game is, I think we have to be excited, but also temper the expectations a little bit. The team is not going to be, it's got to be more than Junior Caminero. And I think there are a lot of guys who have a chance to get better or be better than they were a year ago.
I love what you said about his preparation and his routine, because the two guys that stand out to me when it comes to routine in the last decade are Evan Longoria Remember how many ground balls, Neil? It was just through his routine, down on his knees, there at third, working with Coach Foley. And then Willie Adames. I remember standing there with Willie, and he's there with Rodney Linares. And I go, do you do this drill a lot? And he goes, Jay, I do this and this and this. And I go, oh, I did some of that with my kids when I coached tonight. So it made me feel better. But it was just that type of thing. And when you look at Junior, was there anything that surprised you about his game? Because I know one scout told me, like, yeah, I think he's got Adrian Beltre potential. And I go, really? Okay. Like, it's just like, that's obviously your Hall of Famer, but a guy that could hit, but also he was such an incredible glove man too. Was there anything about his game when he came up that you looked at and you said, wow, that's better than I thought?
I think probably his defense was better than I thought it was going to be, just from what I had heard. Obviously, I'm not watching games on a everyday basis in Durham, but I also saw how much hard work he put in before the games every day and how it was paying off. And I think for a young player, it's especially important to see, sometimes we're so outcome biased that we focus on that alone. But it does help when you're a young person, no matter what you're doing, whether it's in baseball or any sport or life, to see results. And you put in hard work, you want to see an outcome. And I think it had to be rewarding for him to see an outcome. Obviously, he's going to be a player whose bat is going to carry first, but I think he's going to be a better defender over the course of a year than most people realize.
Yeah, for sure. I'm excited for that. And I just love he's attack minded in the field, right? You see a lot of guys are attack minded at the plate. Not a lot of guys, if they struggle defensively, are attack minded. And I like that. He embraced it. This is my position. He owned it without being right. Like, he wasn't selfish about it. He wasn't cocky about it. There was just a confidence in such a young man where it's just like it exudes from him. You can't fake that. What about up the middle here? We're getting Jose Siri, obviously no longer here. We know Taylor Walls, and obviously the injury to Ha-Sung. We're going to see him obviously towards like May. Brandon Lau, I mean, I think the strength with this team, you get Danny Jansen in here. Every strong team in Rays history has had that strong spine. Neil, how do you think that spine is going to kind of figure itself out as we get through the season?
I think it's going to be better than it was a year ago. And I'm excited to see how players grow. I mean, first to have Danny Jansen in, a guy who has been through a unique season. Remember that the Blue Jays were a team that had to play in Dunedin and Buffalo, and he was part of that. And, Charlie Montoya was his manager there, a guy very familiar to Rays fans, and couldn't stop raving about what a great individual and teammate he was. And when Eric Neander and Kevin Cash had their opening news conference down in Port Charlotte, they also raved about all the little things they're hearing and seeing about Danny and the way he carries himself. Beyond that, he's a really good player. And I think the key for him, he's had some real freak injuries, some, hit by pitches or foul tips that have gotten him, that have put him behind the eight ball. And hopefully he can stay devoid of that during the course of this year, because he can really add to the Rays offensively. And he actually, has a pretty good understanding of the strike zone. For a catcher, he's a pretty good contact guy. You add at some point this year, Ha-Sung Kim, who has already been a Gold Glove defender, is a really good bat to ball guy, and can give you more athleticism on the bases. I think that can be a huge benefit. And I think the last quarter of the season after the trades, I really thought Johnny DeLuca improved in terms of what he could bring offensively. So, Brandon Lau is a guy who, as long as he's on the field, and I thought the Rays did a much better job of keeping him on the field when he DH'd a little bit more, is going to be a really important piece of the organization and for the offense too, beyond being a really good defender. I think the Rays should be solid up the middle, and I think they will be better offensively. I think they only need, I thought this was brought up yesterday, if the Rays are a league average offense and they went from the top in 23 to the bottom in 24, if they're right in between that with the pitching staff and defense they have, I really think that they've got a good chance to get back to postseason play.
A guy that it was very interesting. They heaped a lot on him last year, and that's Jose Caballero. Man, what a menace. Just like his attitude and his disposition. He plays a bunch of different spots. How does he fit into this whole thing? Because, you look at last year, he was the starting shortstop, right? And now we know with Taylor Walls and Ha-Sung Kim when he comes back. where does Caballero fit in? Because I feel like on a really good team, on a team that could make a deep postseason run, he might be one of those super U guys that spells these guys in the middle, maybe play a little left field. Do you agree with that sentiment?
He definitely is going to play a role. There's no doubt about it, and an important one. And I thought he got better as the year went on in a lot of areas. I thought his ability to defend and, let's say, make the play in the hole at shortstop got significantly better, and it was because of the work he put in. His base running, I thought, in the second half was much better than the first. His ability to maybe drive the baseball a little bit more improved as the year went on. And I think he wants to continue to get better this year. I think the one thing that stands out, any conversation I had with him last year about what he wants to do, he said, whatever it takes to help the team win. And I think those are when you're talking about guys who are super utility players, guys who are going to maybe not play every day at one position, that's the attitude they need to have.
Right.
And I think he's a really good fit because he has a tenacity. He can get under a team's skin. He's a great guy to have on your team, but maybe not a guy you like to see if you're in the other dugout.
Right.
And he's even willing to learn to play the outfield this year too, if that's going to get him on the field and help this group. So whether it's second, short, third, the outfield, I think he's going to help this team in a lot of ways.
Neil, I think the one guy that is kind of he's so instrumental to kind of where this offense is going to fare is Josh Lowe. I mean, this guy has all the potential in the world. He's, for a big guy, he's such an incredible base stealer. Like, he's just got some insane, uncanny abilities athletically. He's such a great guy, a phenomenal teammate. And when he's going, he's a guy that is just like he's a metronome. He's consistent. Is he kind of that guy where you look at it and says, all right, well, ideally you would like him to be middle of the pack, but if Josh Lowe can be an all-star, I mean, we could look at a top 10 offense and really do some damage to have that hitting and that offense coincide with pitching and defense.
Similar to Junior, I don't like to put pressure on one guy because I do think that this lineup, especially when Kim's comes back, has a chance to be fairly deep. I mean, you look at the left-right balance that they'll have between Josh Lowe and an improving Jonathan Aranda, and Richie Palacios should really benefit from playing, with the shorter porch in right field. And, then you've got Kim and Jansen that you add to, and I didn't mention Brandon Lau, who's obviously a stalwart in terms of the left side of the plate. And then you add, Yandy Diaz and Caminero and Jansen and Kim from the right side. I think it's a group that can do a lot of really good things offensively. I do think Josh's return to, let's say, 23 form is important. And he basically was beat up from it's almost like one injury happened after another. It was like, first there was a hip, and then there was a hamstring, and then an oblique. And it just seemed like he never got healthy. Whereas 23, he was healthy almost the entire year, and he was a 20-30 guy. And I don't know if he needs to be an all-star, but if he's back to the guy who he was in 23, and Junior takes a really good step forward, and Jonathan Aranda is solid, and the additions are good, and Yandy and Brandon, or just Yandy and Brandon, that'll get this group to where they need to be, I think. And we're not even talking about some of the young guys who are prospects who will probably start the year in AAA. But I think they've got probably that's one of the fun things about spring training is the group they have on the come that can allow this group not only to be better this year, but better in years to come is really exciting as well.
When can we see Carson Williams? I know that's the one thing with the Rays. It seems like a annual thing. When is this guy coming up? When is this guy coming up? And Carson Williams seems to kind of be that next guy in that line of thinking. We know how dynamic he can be on the bases and at shortstop. And is it a realistic possibility that we see him at some point this year, you think?
I think it's possible. I mean, it depends how he handles the AAA level and how things are going up here. How good what kind of bounce back year is it for Ha-Sung Kim? How healthy is Brandon Lau? Because Kim can move around and play multiple positions. I mean, I think he wants to play shortstop, but there's a possibility that, he could play another spot if need be, if there are injuries, if there are needs. I'm excited to watch Carson because he had a really good year in AA. Obviously, Chandler Simpson did. Trey Morgan was the player of the year. Dom Keegan is probably a guy who gets a little bit underrated. And then beyond that, you've got Xavier Isaac and Braden Taylor, two former first-round picks who are in camp. So there's this like wave of next
True.
guys. And the thing that we keep hearing is about Carson and about that entire group, how competitive they were with one another and how much they pushed one another to get better and win. And those are like what you want to see out of your organization and your farm system, is developing that wave of guys who can help you get to where you want to go and hopefully win that one championship. And everything I hear about Carson is, he's a super guy, a terrific teammate, and just getting better every year. This is a guy who was not a baseball player full time when he was growing up. He played all kinds of sports, and then he really committed to baseball in his latter teen years. And now we're seeing him really evolve, being a full commitment to baseball, after being drafted a few years ago. And here he is, he'll be knocking on the door. That's for sure.
Let's talk about this pitching, Neil. I'm so excited. I mean, look at these numbers. It's when you get Shane McClanahan back, and I saw that he shaved his head. Like, it's just I talked to him before last season. He wanted to play so bad last year. It must have killed him being in the dugout to watch those guys. But talking to him, talking to Ryan Pepio, these guys, there's just an unbreakable bond when it comes to the Rays pitching. And I know it goes back, a while, years. I mean, going to the James Shields days and how that they were able to pass the baton down to Price, and everybody took such an onus, the Snells and the Archers and everybody. There's that tight knit group. I see that with these guys too. Sky's the limit. And when people make lists of best rotations and the Rays don't get put on there, I think they're missing the boat. It's probably for good, Neil. Like, all right, hey, the Rays will slide under the radar, but if these guys, and I'm knocking on wood, we want them to stay healthy. We're hoping they stay healthy, but man, we could be looking at a hell of a season for that rotation.
I think not only the rotation, Jay, I look at it as a staff as a whole. Mm-hmm. Like, for me, it's just a very deep staff that has the potential to do some really good things. And who knows how the starting rotation will look when we start, because I know the last time we started talking about how good the rotation was, they never pitched to the five that we were talking about, never pitched together because of injuries. But to have a healthy Shane McClanahan and a healthy Drew Rasmussen, I think people forget how good Drew was when healthy. And the fact that the Rays extended him, I thought was wonderful, obviously for the Rays and also for him and his family. To add those two guys, to Pepio, to Boz, to Bradley, to Littell, and have six guys who you feel can really impact you now. And then I'm excited to watch Joe Boyle, who they got from the Jeffrey Springs trade, who people are saying has, big frame. We saw what they did with Tyler Glass now, plus stuff. And then two other guys they added to the 40-man in Joe Rock and Ian Seymour that are left-handed and they're high on, that can, pitch bulk or starter type innings during the course of the year. It gives them some really good depth. But I think the bullpen's pretty darn good too. If you look at what they did the end of last year, the way Edwin Uceda grew, the way Manny Rodriguez came on, Mason Montgomery, Hunter Biggie, Kevin Kelly, to go along with guys like Pete Fairbanks and Garrett Clevenger. And then they got Alex Faedo, who, as a local guy, I'm really excited to see how much that helps him. It can be a real big benefit being around his wife and his kids and a really supportive group and playing in his backyard, so to speak. I mean, there are some other guys that we're going to find out about in camp. We didn't know about Edwin Uceda in spring training last year until we got to know him and meet him. And by the latter part of the year, we're like, boy, this guy's, why wasn't anyone talking about him that much in spring training? And I'm sure there are guys who, as I get to know them in camp, will be saying the same thing about in a few months.
Yeah, Edwin Uceda, I think I saw something on MLB Network in the second half of the season going, is this guy the best reliever in baseball? Like, it was just one of those things where it just kind of, hey, the Rays may not make the postseason, but this guy's doing awesome over here. He's just, what an incredible story. Every single year the Rays seem to find that. There should be an award. If you had to name that award after somebody, the reliever that came out of nowhere award for the Rays, who would we name it after?
I'm trying to think of who the first one that, really popped. That, I mean, I think they've had some of them have been like injury reclamation projects.
Right.
Like, I look back at like Joaquin Benoit and Fernando Rodney and guys who had incredible years after looking for a bounce back. But then there also have been guys that fit the Edwin Uceta category where all of a sudden you're like, wow, I didn't quite know that this kid was that good when the Rays acquired him. So I don't know who I'd name the award after, but you could like have like 3 or 4 different awards, and it credits the, you talked about pitching and starting pitching and that lineage. I think part of it is the consistency that they've had in terms of coaches and teachers, that they're all good coaches and teachers, and they've had consistency there with Jim Hickey and then Kyle Snyder for, really 2 decades that you've had the same. Those have been you've had 2 pitching coaches. How many franchises can say they've had 2 pitching coaches over 2 decades? And I think that helps in getting a message across, consistency of message to go along with people who are good at what they do and can really simplify the message.
Yeah, organizationally, being able to call these guys up and having them be so good so quickly. As soon as Kevin Cash calls down to the bullpen, those guys come in. All of a sudden, 7 appearances in, these guys have given up no runs and 2 hits. They're like, yeah, they're ready in Durham, which is such a great note on how the organization keeps these guys ready. Neil, I want to ask you about kind of just where the Rays, how do you think they stack up with the rest of the AL East? What do you think about some of the moves that the Yankees and the Jays and the Orioles and the Red Sox have made, and where kind of the Rays or you think could slot in?
I think they can surprise some people. Again, if they're a middle of the road, if they at least get to middle of the road offense and their pitching staff is top notch, that generally has been a formula for success. Obviously, a lot of that comes down to health. They need to have a healthy group, I think, on both sides of the baseball, much healthier than they were last year. And if they can accomplish those things, I think it's going to be a fun year. In terms of the rest of the division, the big question mark right now is, where does Alex Bregman go? Like, if he goes to Boston, my view of the Red Sox probably changes a lot. Versus if, let's say, he ends up in Detroit or Chicago, or even, I know that people are discounting him going back to the Astros, but until he closes that door, I'm still not going to believe, probably because of the Pete Alonso situation where, we heard that, it wasn't going to happen, and then he ends up back with the Mets. So in terms of the rest of the division, I think Toronto made some interesting additions. They're in probably the most difficult position of any team, because if they don't get Vladdy signed to an extension before spring training ends, he and Bo are in walk years and they've never won a single playoff game.
Right.
I think, and I don't know how good Max Scherzer will be. They could be a great sign in terms of helping the young guys. If he's not healthy, I'm not sure. They're a hard group to figure for me. I think Baltimore is going to be better in the bullpen because Felix Bautista is back. I think that's probably something that isn't spoken about enough. But they also lost Corbin Burns, and they also lost a 40-homer guy in Anthony Santander. Yeah. That's a lot to replace. I know Tyler O'Neill can help, and I know some of their young players could get better. And Charlie Morton and Sagano, the 2 additions to their starting staff, will help. But having a guy like Burns every 5th day, having a guy like Santander to take a little bit of the pressure off Henderson and Rushman, I'm kind of curious how that goes with those guys not being there. The Yankees, I thought, improved their rotation, improved their bullpen. There's still no Juan Soto, though, and I know Bellinger and Goldschmidt are nice additions, but have they, like, you still are now going to circle Judge in purple,
right,
and show me somebody else can beat me. And they may do that, but I still think they're less, any team without Soto is less difficult to face than when they had him. And then Boston, I think, is a wild card if they get Bregman, because then if, let's say, they're Devers, Story, Bregman, Casas on the infield with Duran and Abreu and
Rafaela.
Yeah, and Rafaela and then a DH of Yoshida. I mean, it's a formidable lineup.
Right.
They added Crochet. I think their pitching staff will probably on paper be better. But again, we're talking about health. Like Crochet's never pitched more than 130
Yeah,
some
I know.
innings. And, some of their other guys have not. I think what will help them is their rotation is deep enough that Whitlock can move to the bullpen. I think that having a guy who can throw 2 innings, if he's back to his form of a few years ago, makes their bullpen a lot better. And I think that if they were to add Bregman, it probably would give them a little bit of like an edge. Without Bregman, I'm curious as to how they look, because I think they still need like that piece that's going to really drive the engine, so to speak.
Right. Yeah, because he plays with a little bit of a chip on his shoulder, and he's got that championship pedigree. And interesting to see. I think their defense is probably better with him at third than Devers. Where do do you slide him in the second? Right. That's
Like,
an interesting thing. Where you play Bregman at second.
If he would have to learn a new position, but
Yeah.
if let's say you put him at third and Devers at first, then what do you do with Yoshida if you're going to DH Casas?
Right.
Like, that's a pretty big contract to just, because they don't want to play him in the outfield anymore.
No.
And with Rafaela and Duran and Abreu and Ref Snyder as their fourth outfielder, they really don't have a need to play him much in the outfield. So they basically would have to punt on that contract, so to speak, which I don't think they want to do at this stage. I mean, it's still year 3 out of 5.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, dang, man, that's good. It's interesting. You're right. That one move could just kind of tip the balance there. And I'm with you on the Orioles, Neil. I'm looking at their lineup and I go, okay, a lot of young players, but I feel like we're in the position with Baltimore now that we were with Toronto 3 to 5 years ago. And it was like, hey, look, it's Kevin Biggio, it's Bo Bichette, it's Vladimir Guerrero Jr. You have all these young stars, but if they never get to that level, then eventually you get to the end of their contract and it's like, did we just waste this youth, right? This movement. And I worry about the Baltimore rotation because they brought in Morton, but they didn't really bring in a number one starter that is going to go in there and pound 200 innings. And you look at MLB.com, you're saying they had Zach Eflin as the ace. And I think that's interesting how that goes. Their bullpen, obviously getting Batista back is good. Cano slides down, but that starting rotation for them, I mean, it's 7 days out of 7. I'm taking the Rays rotation over theirs.
It a lot depends on Grayson Rodriguez.
Right.
Grayson's stuff is number one. If he becomes a 1 and is healthy, it changes the look and feel of their starting staff. But there are a lot of guys who are real solid that they have. Mm-hmm. Kramer's solid, Eflin's solid, Morton's going to be solid. Sagano will probably be solid. But yeah, you're right. But that's how they won a lot of games when they were really good a few years ago. Like, now they have Sir Anthony Dominguez and Soto behind Cano and Bautista. There's some thump. They still have a lot of thump in that bullpen, a lot of velocity. So, and I wouldn't sleep on that ball club.
I'm with you, my man. It's going to be a good race, and I cannot wait for the season ahead. One of the most unique seasons in Tampa Bay Rays history. Make sure you follow our guys, Rays Radio, all the great stuff that Neil Solondz, Andy Freed, Chris Adams-Wall, Chris Miller, everybody over there. Neil, thank you so much, man. You always make our show, whatever show I'm on, a whole heck of a lot smarter and better. Can't wait to see you, my friend. Thank you so much. Enjoy spring training, and we'll talk to you again soon. Have a great week.
Sounds good. Great to chat with you.
Thanks, pal.